Hello. In this lesson, we will talk about citators, and in particular, how to determine whether or not you can rely on the validity of a case you have retrieved on Westlaw. On Westlaw, you have access to a product called KeyCite. KeyCite actually answers three distinct questions for you. Number one, is my case good law? Number two, how did my case proceed through the courts? And number three, have any other documents analyzed and cited to my particular case? Those three questions are represented by these three links when looking at a case. First question, is my case good law? I could look to the negative treatment link or the appropriate flags, which we will talk about momentarily. Question two, how did my case go through the courts? Click on the history link to get a graphical depiction of the path your case took through the courts. And three, I need to get other documents that have cited to my case in a positive manner or did a deep dive and analysis on my case. How do I get those documents? I look to citing references. For the purposes of this lesson, I'm really only going to cover question number one. I want you to become comfortable with identifying where and when you can rely on a case. As such, I want to talk in more detail about the various flags and markers you could see attached to a case. This particular case I'm displaying, for example, Rivera v. Centro, has a yellow flag. And in fact, if you click on this Powered by KeyCite link that is displayed next to every case, it actually gives you a nice summary of the various flags and markers you could see attached to a case. A yellow flag for a case means that the case is still good law, but it does have some negative references to it. It could be that your case, that there was another case out there that disagreed with your case, criticized your case, or simply distinguished itself on the facts from your case. Your case is still good, but it's somewhat of a warning, if you will, that there are some negative references to your case. A red flag, on the other hand, can mean one of two things, and this is where people get confused at times. A red flag could mean that your case was directly invalidated on appeal by a higher authority, or a red flag could mean that one of the issues in your case is no longer good, and as long as you do not cite your case for the issue that has been invalidated, every other issue remains in play. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. Sometimes you're going to encounter on the federal level a case that has a blue stripe. Blue stripe simply means your case has been appealed up to the U.S. Court of Appeals or the U.S. Supreme Court. And finally, and this is one where no other citator on the market can do this for you, an orange overrule risk symbol is letting you know that your case has been indirectly overruled. We'll talk about that last, but just wanted to focus on this case at hand, Rivera. Now, Rivera, as I said, has a yellow flag. Yellow flag means your case is good, but it does have some negative references to it. One of the time savers that Westlaw provides you, whenever you are looking at a document that has negative references, we will give you the document that most severely impacted your case in a negative manner. So, our case has 10 negative references. The most negative reference to our case, Rivera, was Gonzalez, which called our case into doubt. Now, should I be worried about that? Well, not immediately. I mean, I would sort of want to take a look at Gonzalez and see what from Rivera was called into doubt. But keep in mind that these flags are guidelines, not gospel. The reason I'm not overly concerned right now about Gonzalez is that our case is a First Circuit Court of Appeals decision. Gonzalez is a U.S. District Court case from Puerto Rico. So it's a lower court, and it obviously could never have an impact on my ability currently to use Rivera. But keep in mind, if I am on the opposite side and I read Gonzalez and I try to convince, my court to no longer use Rivera, it could be setting up Rivera to be impacted, overruled, I should say, down the road by maybe another First Circuit case or the U.S. Supreme Court. But that's the thing you have to make sure you're aware of. When you look at cases that have negative impacts on your case, if it's a case from a lower court or a different jurisdiction, I'm not going to worry too much about that. And I wanted to show you another example. I've got a case by the name of Kubert v. Best. Now, this is a case from the Appellate Division in New Jersey. It has two negative references. The most severe negative reference, Vega v. Crane disagreed with my case. Now, if Vega were a Supreme Court decision from New Jersey and it disagreed with Kubert, that would certainly be a red flag. But Vega is a case from the New York Supreme Court, the trial court in New York, and that's obviously never going to have an impact on my ability to use Kubert in New Jersey. Completely different jurisdiction. And by the way, if this is the most negative reference to our case, do I need to actually click on this yellow flag or click on the negative treatment tab to look at the other remaining negative references? I think it's a good idea to do it. You don't always have to, but if I click on that yellow flag right now, you'll notice, again, we knew that there were two negative references. The most severe negative reference was Vega. The other negative reference was Robinette, which distinguished itself on the facts from our case. And just an FYI, I'm never ever worried about cases that distinguish themselves on the facts from my case. I'm going to maybe read them to maybe see why they distinguished. They're comparing apples to oranges, for example. But in terms of impacting the validity of your case, absolutely not. So don't worry about cases that distinguish on the facts. Now let's talk about cases that have red flags, because this is where there is a lot of confusion. And, I see, unfortunately, at times, students and researchers adopting very lazy habits with respect to research. They will encounter cases that have red flags and will immediately say, I can't use that case. And that's absolutely not the case, no pun intended. If you pull up a case and it has a red flag, and the most severe treatment, again, which we give you on the face of your case itself, the most severe treatment says reversed by or vacated by, that is letting you know that your case was directly invalidated on appeal. If that is the instance, if that is what you were dealing with, do not use the case you retrieved. Go to the higher reversing authority. And we could certainly see this here. Our case, Davey v. Locke, has a red flag, and we know it was reversed by Locke v. Davey. I can actually click on the red flag, and I get this depiction. Here's our case. They appealed it up to the Supreme Court. Cert was granted, and the U.S. Supreme Court reversed our case on appeal. So I'm going forward, maybe take a look at Locke v. Davy. I'm not going to rely on the lower court decision because it's been wiped out. Now, that's a situation where your case has a red flag and it says reversed by or vacated by. On the other hand, you pull up a case, it has a red flag, and it doesn't say reversed by. I'm looking at Mustafi v. Presto Foods. It has a red flag, but here we learn that the Florida Supreme Court, my case is an appellate court decision in Florida, higher authority here, Florida Supreme Court, disapproved of our case, but it was disapproved of in the Aramark v. Easton case. Okay, our case wasn't reversed directly on appeal. So if you pull up a case and it has a red flag and it says overruled by, abrogated by, disapproved of by, that is a clue to you that the case wasn't invalidated directly on appeal, but instead one of the issues in your case is no longer good. And as long as you do not cite your case for the bad issue or issues, everything else remains in play. So how do I identify which issues are good and bad? Well, before I go there, first thing I would want to do from Mustafi, I see that it has a red flag. I know it wasn't reversed on appeal. First thing I'd want to see is does this case say anything or have an issue that I want to cite? Because if it doesn't, I don't have to worry about identifying which issues are good or bad. So how do I do that? Well, again, shortcut on Westlaw. You already know that the head notes will summarize each individual point of law in the case. This case has 7 distinct issues. Issues 1 and 5 deal with the topics environmental law. Issues 3 and 4 deal with the topic causes of action. Let's say for argument's sake that I'm writing a memo or brief dealing with the doctrine of caveat emptor. Those are issues 6 and 7 in this case. So I've now identified that these are the issues that are really important to me for my argument. Our case has a red flag. We know it was disapproved of by Aramark. We know that at least one of those issues is no longer good. I click on the red flag next to Mustafi or the negative treatment tab. And here's the really cool feature we provide you with. When you pull up a list of your negative references, that last column is letting you know which issues in your case were impacted in a negative manner by the citing case. So Aramark disapproved of issues 1 and 5 in our case. Now, if you didn't remember what issues 1 and 5 were, you simply hover over those particular points and we will actually tell you right there on the face of the document itself that Aramark invalidated the 2 environmental law issues from our case. So as long as I don't cite Mustafi for the environmental law issues, every other issue is still valid, including the vendor-purchaser issues. Okay, so that's really, really important with respect to red flag cases. There are far too many people who immediately would see the red flag and walk away, and that's really a bad habit to get into. You need to investigate to see why it got the red flag. Final thing, and this is where Westlaw is the only research provider that does this for you. You will encounter cases that have orange overrule risk markers. What does that mean? Well, an overrule risk marker means that your case has been indirectly overruled by a case outside the direct citation chain. And what I mean by that, I think I could actually show you better by using this particular handout. Take a look at this handout here in the graphic. You'll see that case number 1 was decided in 2011. Now, case number 1 was good up until 2017 when case number 4 explicitly invalidated case number 1 for a particular issue, kind of like the Mustafi case that we just saw. Mustafi was invalidated for those 2 environmental law issues, right? But between 2011 and 2017, when case 4 invalidated case 1 for certain issues, cases 2 and 3 relied on case number 1 for those issues. Now, those cases were not directly cited when case 4 overruled case 1, but they are now pointing to bad law. And this has been a problem with citators for years. You know, researchers would be citing these cases without realizing that they're pointing to bad law. And this is where Westlaw has your back. Now, when you're looking at cases, Malesi v. US, for example, you will see these orange markers. And the really cool thing about this, it's letting us know that Malesi is at risk of being indirectly overruled because of Papadopoulos v. Target. Now, why is that? Well, here's a quick way of identifying the parts of Malesi or any case that are not good anymore, potentially. When you pull up a case and it has an orange marker, click on the right arrow, and we take you into the opinion, and we are identifying the part of your case that is no longer good. Our case, Malesi, was relying on a case by the name of Elwood v. McCloskey. Elwood was invalidated by the Papadopoulos case. That is why our case now has that orange flag. And let me just take a step back. In Massachusetts for years, the law with respect to slip and recoveries on snow and ice, if it was an unnatural accumulation of snow and ice, a plaintiff could recover. Now, that was the law up until 2010 when Papadopoulos v. Target said, we no longer go by that doctrine. We're going to adopt the doctrine of reasonable care. So, Elwood was decided in 1992, and that was the law for, 18 years until Papadopoulos invalidated Elwood for that particular doctrine. In 1996, Malesi cited Elwood for that particular proposition. And in fact, if I click on the number 2 here, you'll see it takes us back to the head note where it's talking about natural accumulation of snow and ice. So the reason that Malesi, this part of Malesi, is at risk for you if you cite to it is because Papadopoulos invalidated Elwood for that natural accumulation of snow and ice doctrine. We simply don't use that doctrine in Massachusetts anymore. Papadopoulos requires us to use the doctrine of reasonable care. So nobody else does this for you, and you won't make the mistake of citing something that is no longer good. And in fact, even if you didn't see the orange overrule risk marker, you can clearly see if you're reading this portion of the case that Elwood has a red flag, and I could simply hover over that, and it's letting me know that Elwood was overruled. So we've got your back in many different ways with these red flags and these orange overrule risk markers, and I hope that was helpful. The other thing I do want to point out, if you did want to review more about KeyCite and citators, from the lawschool.thomsonreuters.com page, if you click the Knowledge Center link, there are additional e-learnings you could take that cover citators. So when you're in the Knowledge Center and click Essential Legal Research, Validate Your Authority will allow you to review additional e-learnings on this topic. Okay, good luck and happy researching.